Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Everyday Musician Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Murgala. My guest this week is baritone and conductor from Philadelphia and is currently the director of choral activities and music performance at Clark University. He is also the artistic director, conductor of the Germantown Concert Chorus, music director of the Bennington County Choral Society, and the Keene Chorale based in New Hampshire. Please let me welcome my dear friend, Cailin Marcel Manson. Cailin, good to have you on the podcast, finally.
Awesome. It's great to, finally get to talk via this medium, It's fun.
Yeah, and of course, you have a very interesting story. You seem to be doing it all. You're a conductor, you're a music educator, you're a performer.
Yeah.
And let's talk about that journey of yours as a vocalist and how you became a conductor and how you're, teaching at the collegiate level.
So it's interesting. Voice, of course, has always been my first love. And I've been singing forever. I really can't even remember when I started singing, because it's just always been a part of my life. But I would say that conducting actually came early somewhat too. Obviously, the way schools are set up, it wasn't something I pursued wholeheartedly until much later. But I have, of course, I sang in church. I took some voice lessons. I could go down that rabbit hole. There's not enough time, I think, to go all the way down that rabbit hole.
Oh yeah, we got time. Don't worry about it.
So I started voice lessons and studying, relatively early, but not in any way that anyone would usually think of as formal. I mean, my family's always been really musically, involved in the sense that, we sang at church choir. I know, like, my dad and his, siblings had this group called the Gospel Pearls that used to sing on the radio apparently when they were young. And this is something I didn't find out until much later in my life. But they were all
Wow.
And my mom has always been singing in church choirs, and she was in choir in high school and everything like that. So I got some of that honest. And my dearly, late grandmother, my paternal grandmother, was an organist at her church, and not like, a trained classical organist, but, it was a Baptist church, and she knew how to play the hymns and knew how to, accompany and, work with the choir and stuff like that. But, it was interesting. It was her dream to become a classical musician. And of course, that was not something she lived to see. So for me to be someone that, found my calling and my livelihood in classical music, it was kind of a fulfillment of her dreams. God rest her soul. So it's, so I've been doing it almost my entire life. And I actually started conducting while I was in high school. So when I was sort of a senior in high school, I really started composing quite a bit. My girlfriend at the time and I had written an opera together, a bunch of other things. And I had a senior independent project when I was in high school where I would conduct the honors choir, which I also sang in, as well as, a couple instrumental ensembles. And I also composed a piece for the honors choir to perform at what we called the ice cream festival at the end of the year. And so I taught them that and conducted that. I ended up being, from what I remember, I think this is accurate, that I was the first student conductor in PMEA history.
Wow.
God, I'm dating myself. So back in my junior year of high school, the conductor of district chorus wanted, just to see if there were any kind of students who were interested in conducting. And she chose kind of three of us, kind of stepped up to audition, and I was chosen. And so I got to conduct two pieces in our district chorus concert that year. And then the my senior year, I got to do it again with the other in districts again. So it was just very interesting that conducting was something that kind of manifested itself relatively young for me. And then when I was on my way to college, or, beginning to start college, I started college young, very young. I was, 16 in my first year of college. I was already kind of in a mixed track, but I needed to focus on something. So of course I chose voice. And I did a vocal performance, degree. And then I ended up at the Mozarteum, for grad school, and was an opera major there first, and being somewhat facile at the piano and being a geek that could play from the open score.
Right. Yeah. And just to be clear, for people who are listening to the podcast for the first time and don't know what the Mozarteum is, Mozarteum is a music college in Salzburg, Austria, right?
Yes. Named after the famous composer, founded by the foundation that was started by his wife. Interestingly enough.
Good old famous Mozart.
Yeah, good old famous Mozart. But anyway, interior to my first term there, I was pretty much told that I was going to be a double major.
For voice and piano?
No, for opera and orchestral conducting. And so, And so I did two Magisterstudium, one in opera and music theater. Opera and music theater is the same thing, and the other in orchestral conducting. And then once I finished that and started to, look at my life after that, I came back to the States for a period of time. I actually started teaching in higher education then, but at a very small conservatory that is no longer open, in the northeastern part of Pennsylvania. And then I, kind of tried to wean myself off from being tethered to academia, just because I went from studying to be a performer to teaching other people how to do it without necessarily giving myself the full chance to, hit on starting a performing career. And actually what was funny is that I find that we could dig into this later, but I find that a lot of no shade to my friends in academia. I think they do a great job, but there are a lot of academics that don't do that. And still so, there are some people who, are study, and then get a really good position. But didn't necessarily, have the time out, like in the trenches of the field, which is a whole different ball of wax.
Right. And, yeah. You bring up a very interesting point. You study so hard in school just to be in academia again, just to teach, right? Without actually having any experience in the field.
Yeah. And so I kind of weaned myself away from that and ended up getting really, again, my whole story is really, really young. Ended up getting my first, Fest contract, which is a long-term singing contract at a small opera theater in Bremen. That was my first, and then ended up having a number of other, either Gast contracts, which are literally like one-offs, or for a production or something, and other fests after that in other opera houses, and concertizing quite a bit. So it kind of took off after that. And I spent, the better part of, a decade, living, having a place that I called home, but living out of a suitcase, It's kind of,
Right. Yeah. Especially as a performing artist, you tend to get used to that for a very long time, but it's also nice to have home base.
Well, you do, even if you only are there, you only see it for like a week at a time, and then you're gone. You're there for 10 days, and you're gone for 3 months, and then and being in opera, which I did. Now that I look back, I guess I can look in hindsight. Opera was maybe about a third of the performing I did. Now that I think about it, opera roles and being in opera productions as a principal was really about a third of the work I did. The rest of the work I did was really concert, oratorio, and recital work. Which, you used to be, I mean, if you think about a couple or 2 or 3 generations of singer before, it wasn't necessarily stratified, but there were a number of singers. You think about people like Ellie Ameling or whatever, who were really concertist singers and had major careers just as that. And they didn't necessarily have operatic careers. And if it was a small portion of what they did. Whereas, there were a number of other singers, thinking about the greats like Fischer-Dieskau and Schwarzkopf, who were big operatic names and also left such a huge legacy as leader singers. José Van Damme, with Melody, and Janet Baker with, art song as well. So, there's always kind of a mix of different repertoire that you have to be able to do. And I think now in the 21st century, what's I think is interesting is that you have to be kind of able to do everything, but everyone's also trying to find their niche. I know I kind of did like a big swoop around, but like you're trying to find, you're trying to find that niche, something that really calls to you and compels you as an artist, and then allows you to start creating a body of work. And I think that that's probably what I was kind of getting to as part of kind of my journey, is that I ended up sort of stepping away, talking about that, going back to education. I've been teaching probably the entire time that I've been a working musician in some form or another. But I found in about 2009, 2010, I found myself sort of asking the question, what now? Like I've achieved quite a bit of the goals in terms of singing and performing internationally. And what do I do now? Where is the journey taking me? And I found myself more compelled to interface with people, especially, people I feel kind of got not left behind, but just didn't get opportunities. And I realized that I received a great deal of opportunities because of people who either championed me or were just happened to be there for me when I needed the support or when I needed the push, and it's not that people still don't exist like that, but I noticed that whether they were older singers who had never actually had the opportunity to study really seriously or to learn a lot of the academic stuff like diction and repertoire and all that, or if they were younger musicians, some of whom had actually gotten an undergraduate education, but it wasn't as full or as deep as it needed to be for them to be able to start pursuing their next level, if that's what they wanted to do. And so I found myself gravitating towards that, settling back in Philadelphia and starting to establish programs, of which the Institute for the Vocal Arts, the Germantown Institute for the Vocal Arts, and the Germantown Concert Chorus became kind of offshoots of that kind of calling to do that work. And it just kind of grew from there. And so I think that sort of that journey about kind of finding yourself as an artist, figuring out what pulls at you, and then establishing a body of work that speaks for itself so that you don't necessarily have to kind of say, oh, this is what I do. It's like, no, just go look it up. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You bring up so many great points here. Well, first of all, music ran in your family. It sounds like music is in your veins, and
it wasn't and that was I can't kind of stress this enough, that it wasn't actually in a formal way. Like I got inundated with music just because my family was always listening to it. My older brothers, of course, are from the generation that really, really originated hip hop. And so they were steeped in that. So I was constantly listening to that. It wasn't the music that called me, and it wasn't the music I was the most interested in, but I was surrounded by it. And the fact that almost none of it was really formalized except for the stuff that I got in in school, like in the public school system, which Cheltenham had, and I think still has, an excellent music program. And the fact that I was going to a Lutheran church that, that even though it was, how can I say, demographically mixed, still did a ton of Bach, so I got to sing Bach cantatas in German at church, in the same service that we would be, singing "We've Come This Far by Faith" and, spirituals and gospel hymns. So I ended up having a little bit of the best of everything, within my growing up context. And the fact that it was done, I think that's probably why I say that I felt that kind of call in my life, is the fact that it was done with a couple people who really knew what they were doing, but most of the people were kind of amateurs and couldn't tell you about the fully diminished seventh chords that Bach uses. And even I didn't know what the heck a fully diminished seventh chord was when I was doing it,
Of course, yeah.
Being in that context, it gave me, it fed me in a complete way, so that I felt a real visceral, almost unknowing connection to the music, with that then became educated via study. Right. So.
Right. Yeah. I'm just thinking right now that I can't picture you in any other profession other than music. Have you had that conversation with yourself where you're like, if I wasn't a musician, I'd probably end up doing this?
Well, people kind of ask you. We all, I think, ask that question of ourselves, right?
Yeah, including myself. Do. Yeah, I'm like, what would I be doing if I, wasn't a violinist?
It's funny. I think I've had that question frequently, and I guess I've come not to some certain answers, but I think certainty is almost death for anybody intellectually. But I realized that I was, yes, one of those geeky kids that read through the entirety of my father's Encyclopedia Britannica, right? I mean, my father was an environmental chemist. And so, just downing all the books. I was so interested in ancient religions, like the mythologies of the ancient world, whether it was Zoroastrianism or the ancient Egyptian, the Kemetic religion, or Greco-Roman mythology, Norse mythology. Like I absorbed all that, and then I loved foreign languages. So in some ways that all fed me who I became and who I am as an artist. But I always had those interests. So I feel like if I wasn't a musician, I can't imagine not being one, that I probably would have ended up being some classics or like classics or ancient languages or ancient religion, like some sort of linguistic religion history professor type thing. I'll probably still be kind of an intellectual and an academic. But the reason why I am a musician or performing artist is I think it balances me, right? Because when you live in that really highly rarefied kind of intellectual world, your body tends to be kind of a carrying mechanism for your brain. And, and I find that being a musician actually forces me constantly to engage with my emotions and to validate them and to treat them as, if not equal, but as an engine that helps fuel my intellect. I rather than it being kind of, yes, it's what I'm called to, it's also what balances me out.
Right. Yeah. Balance, I think, is super crucial, especially in the life of a performing artist. Yeah. I think we also fall into the trap of constantly being around music, and sometimes it's also good to just take a break. Mm-hmm. I think, especially in this time of the year, it's March 2020, where we're starting to we are definitely pushing through probably till end of May, also June, we're starting to feel burnt out. And I think that's what, you have to think of the bigger picture when it comes to, being a performing artist. We do it for a variety of different reasons. But I do want to transition this conversation into opera. And then eventually it'll kind of, I want to steer the conversation towards your teaching at Clark University
Mm-hmm.
and, what it means to be a 21st century artist, because that's a topic that I'm very interested in
Mm-hmm.
on this podcast. So I guess one question that comes to mind is you're a baritone, right?
Yes.
But I've seen you and I've heard you sing in all sorts of ranges. So can you sometimes I'd be playing in, I'd be in rehearsal, you be conducting, and then you just, hit like a high C in the soprano range. So like describe describe your voice. Like, what do you like to sing? How do you like to sing stuff? And we'll go from there.
Well, it's funny because it seems to be like another topic of discussion. I think I'm a baritone because I've settled on that. Even when I was in undergrad, there was debates. It was like, is Cailin a baritone? Is Cailin really a tenor? When I was in high school, getting ready to, audition for college and things like that, I was singing. There were a couple I started as a coloratura soprano, frankly, before puberty hit. And I was singing.
Okay, fair enough.
And even after puberty hit, I still maintained a really strong falsetto. And so even when I was in high school, I was singing like alto and soprano solely in some, pieces in church. There was actually, this is a very funny story. I don't know if anyone who was in that district course, I'm trying to remember what year that was, 1990, was it 1997, something like that. The one where I ended up actually conducting district chorus for the first time. There was this piece that the sopranos had a high B flat in to end it. And I just didn't like the way they sang it. And so I stood up there. My friends in high school love to remind me of the story. I stood up there and I just had the pianist play and I sang the last phrase up to the high B flat. And almost all the soprano ones turned like red in the face. Like, they were like,
Wow.
The funny thing was, here was the thing. The funny thing was, in district chorus, when I was in high school, I sang bass 2. So I was singing the lowest notes in the choir.
See, but this isn't the first time we've had this conversation, because you would sing bass and all the way up to soprano, right? So like your voice is like a very unique spectrum of colors that.
So this goes into some of, we'll go into something we'll touch on a little later in the conversation where, we work really hard. I mean, you work really hard, and the way I was trained, at least in terms of building a foundational technique for voice, is that the voice needs to be flexible. It needs to be free. It needs to be strong, especially to sing classical repertoire. It needs to be strong to sing musical theater, frankly, or pop or anything like that. But it needs to be, there's an Olympic level. I know a lot of people have said that, and so it seems kind of tired now, but there really is an Olympic level to the athleticism a voice needs to have to sing the classical repertoire. And especially because of, no amplification, and it's still in many places, although some places are amplifying some.
But very rarely though.
Yeah. And so there needs to be that, but there's been one of the biggest facets, I think one of the features of my voice, even before puberty, frankly, was its flexibility. And so even as my voice ages and got bigger, got a little higher in terms of my modal range, my non-falsetto range, my modal range. I've always worked to maintain and to keep that flexibility in my voice. But what becomes problematic is that when you're starting a career, it's easier to start a career, especially as an operatic singer, or if people can classify you, right? And especially in the German house system, they have the Fach system that still gets used. I mean, now which is the Fach means like the make or the type of your voice. And so people talk about what's your Fach, or, what various Fächer you sit in. And so, there's different types of baritone, there's different types of tenor, there's different types of soprano. And And depending on what Fach you're assigned, especially when you're given a fest contract or something like that, that determines the roles you get assigned to sing when you're on contract. And there are repertoire overlaps between the types. So, I started out as a lyrische baritone, or a lyric baritone. And then by the time I started to not do as much opera as, like sort of in the mid to late 2000s, and I was doing a lot more concert work, I was what was called a cavalier baritone then, sort of a noble baritone. So I would sing some of the heftier roles that required a little bit more of a metallic sound, but also lied a bit higher. Excuse me. So, and now, within the last couple of years, I've been singing quite a bit more Verdi, and, with singing Courvenal last year. And I'm going to be singing Wotan with the Wagner Vermont Festival, this coming, August. I'm singing a lot of the Helden baritone, the hero baritone, the dramatic baritone rep. But I've had to sing tenor stuff before, just because I don't always like to trot it out. I do have a workable high B or high C sometimes. And, I like to demonstrate sometimes for students or for choruses that I work with, like how, with a preface saying you're not supposed to sound the way I sound, but here's kind of the color of the vowel I'm looking for. So, to be able to demonstrate in their range what I'm looking for.
And I think that's what makes you, sorry to intervene, but I think that's what makes you an excellent educator, because you do have the experience of each vocal range, which definitely would like to dive into the collegiate level now, because you're professor at Clark University, which is based in Massachusetts. And I just want to talk about your experience there, because this is your first year as a full-time faculty there. And some of the things that we discuss on the program here on the Everyday Musician podcast is what it means to be a 21st century artist. And we kind of touched base on that a moment ago. But describe your experience teaching at the collegiate level, and what you're teaching these students to prepare them for careers in music.
Well, I think that's actually, not to steal your words, because you actually said them, you said it so succinctly, but I think that actually is at the foundation of part of my teaching philosophy is. I think that for some reason, I think that we've made, and I think we falsely made, a real distinction between what we call pre-professional teaching and kind of general teaching. And I think that in our era, when where we know, and not everyone's going to be a doctor, right? We know that not everyone's going to go into the heights of any profession. They have to feel a particular drive to do that. But I feel that when it comes to the performing arts in particular, because in a societal way, we've treated them as kind of cultural perks, not like culture. How many commercials have we seen, like the arts are essential and all that, but we still treat them like they're cultural perks, like they're not essential to our daily living, to the way we think about structuring curriculum, to the way we think about prioritizing funds and allocation of resources, right? So I think that because of that dichotomy, that influences our too much of the educational philosophy. And how I differ from that is I believe that whether you're going to be going into it as a pre-professional, or if you're just learning to appreciate it, you do the arts a disservice if you water it down at all. So whether I was teaching high school or youth or community members or pre-professionals, I try to give people as close to the real deal as possible. So, and it's really a matter of understanding the audience that you're teaching to. So if you're teaching to a bunch of people who don't know a lot about, the intricacies of theory or the history behind the piece, you actually need to tell them that. You actually need to give them that. You can't spend an entire rehearsal note banging Because
Sure.
at the end of the day, especially with working with, whether you're working with youth or adults, they need to understand why the notes were chosen or why the notes flow from one to the next, because then they get to connect to it intellectually and not just being pitch machines.
In addition to that, it's I might have talked about this on the podcast before, but I had a teacher at UMass. I won't disclose his or her name, but this person assigned homework for us, and he would be like, every time you submit your homework, I don't want potato chips. I want kale, a nice healthy kale salad when you would submit your homework. And I think that's kind of the same way with the arts, right? You want to provide education, as well as me being a music educator, you want to provide as much kale to these students as possible. So that way, for one, they enjoy it, but also you are doing the music justice in the end.
Well, I mean, I love kale, but I always,
yeah, of course. I mean, you want your potato chips every once in a while. Yeah.
I'm decidedly a carnivore, so I'm like, yes, give me the whole steak, because that's the other thing. It's not like I actually put it forward as an instructor that not everything is actually supposed to be easily digestible. Like, you're actually supposed to chew on it. Even if it's not your profession, you should be chewing on it. You should be thinking about it. You shouldn't just be like, oh, I sang that nice piece. Okay, I'm done. On to the next. Like, it should sit with you, and you should have to digest it even after it's left your mouth. Right.
Sure.
And yeah. I find that there, it's not so much, it's interesting, that there's been, whereas some other colleagues in the field, I find, have found, some reticence about having that approach. Every group of people that I've worked with, whether it's been, adults in a community chorus or youth or collegiate students, have actually appreciated the fact that I'm actually unwilling to kind of not give them this whole big hunk of steak and say, yes, chew on this. Right. But I think the difference between maybe me and some other people that do that give them the whole steak is like, you know what? I kind of understand that you probably need a steak knife first. Like, do you understand what I'm saying? Like,
sure, yeah.
And I think that that's the difference, is that
in order to eat the steak, you need to cut it with something.
You need the tools.
Right.
You need the tools.
Yeah.
And I think that's really at the foundation. That's the fundament of my teaching philosophy, is that I have no personal attachments to what you're going to do with what we're working on, because that has everything to do with you as a student or the students, and nothing really to do with me as an instructor. But what I'm going to present this content to you. I'm going to present this knowledge base to you for you to do with what you will. But I also know that you need tools to help you deal with it. And so I'm going to try to provide you with as much of that as possible. And then if I give you the steak and I give you a fork and a knife, and it's a nice sharp knife or a nice steak knife, and you just sit there and bite into the steak without using the knife and say, oh my God, this is hard to chew. Why did you give me this? Then I'm going to just look like you're stupid. I'm like, well, the knife is right there. Cut it.
Sure. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's so clear. I love how you explained all of that so clearly and concisely. Now let's dive into one of my favorite topics, and that is being a 21st century musician and artist in general. So we are always, I feel like every year we're always trying to figure out what is next when it comes to the performing arts, how to teach the next generation. Even for you and I, we're trying to figure this out all the time, every year, every day, how to distribute music, how to perform how to convince people to, stop watching Netflix and go to a opera or go to a classical music concert, all of that. So, and you've had great success in getting great crowds to your performances as a conductor and as a soloist. And I just want to talk about how you do that, and what are some of the things that you do in order to find that success, outside of the, for a general audience member to, leave the house and go to your performance.
Well, so I think that there's been so many like articles and books and things written about this. And I feel like there are things that we miss. And it's not because I'm saying anything original. I think I've heard other people say similar things to me, maybe not exactly in the same way, but we're in a time, and it's a good thing. It's a double-edged sword, but it's a good thing that people need to, we're talking, I do a lot, sometimes it's really grading work, but I have to do a lot of work, especially being, let's face it, an African-American classical musician. A lot of the work that I have to do is, always has some bent of diversity and inclusion involved in it. And I think that we're especially in a time now where where people are looking to see themselves represented in an art form. And that doesn't necessarily just apply to seeing a black face on the stage, right? Or seeing a person of color in a leading role, or seeing more people of color, frankly, on podiums. Let's get that out there right away.
Sure. Yeah. I agree. Definitely agree.
But I think that beyond that, people need to see that there's a real connection between how they live and who they live with and the art form. And it's something that, as much as, and that's why I think it's funny, as much as in our 21st century think, we talk about, the old dead white guys that make up the Western musical canon, and how we're trying to expand the canon or blow up the canon or whatever. There's certain things about how the Western musical canon and how it's been maintained, especially in Europe, are things that we just didn't inherit. Like, we inherited the canon, but we didn't inherit the ethos around maintaining it, right? So you go over one of the reasons why. And I'm talking about like the greats. I'm someone whose shoulders I stand, Marian Anderson, or, who was the lady from Philadelphia. Like, she was well into she was 55 when she made her debut at the Metropolitan Opera. But she had already established herself as a world renowned concert singer, sung with Toscanini, abroad. But there's always been more opportunities abroad because every small hamlet has its own opera house and its own symphony orchestra. And it's not like, you're doing, pardon me for saying, you're not doing backwoods Baroque, right? These people are actually well-trained, really good world-class musicians who happen to live in a community, right? So we still have not, gotten that sense of the fact that we need to cultivate in each locale a high level of performing quality and a high level of artistry that then is community based. And because when you have community based, the people who live with you see themselves in the performers because they know you. I think one of the reasons why there's a necessity for community choirs and for community orchestras and all that is that the people of the community will support them because they know who's in it. I've tried to advance multiple times the fact that, with a number of people that I work, a number of organizations I work with, that it actually doesn't matter so much what you do, as long, in terms of repertoire and programming, as long as you make sure that that the community is involved and that the people know that they're welcome to come and that you expect them to be there. Right. So,
right. Yeah.
And that if you are going to do something that's going to be difficult for the public to swallow, that you provide enough programming on the on-ramp so that they can start to digest it and chew on it when you present the dinner, when you present the meal, when you present the concert. So you need I feel that as a 21st century artist, that it's not so much that we have to constantly try to find a way of branding ourselves, although branding helps, especially with media and marketing and all that. But that when you're presenting a concert or when you're presenting yourself and your work for consumption, I hate to use that term, but it is the term, that you also were thinking about how is this really tied to what's around me? You know, we're starting to see, I mean, they're always going to be there. We're always going to have the Met. We're always going to have the BSO, hopefully. We're always going to have the New York Philharmonic. We're always going to have the big international organizations that are the top 0.2% of our field, right? But between the top and the bottom, there's a big chasm. And we as artists have to find a way to fill that. And the only way we do is by saying, you know, hey, I actually go to the store with you. And I actually happen to be a musician that traveled all over the world. And I'm doing this concert right here. And yeah, you should come. And as a matter of fact, why don't you come over for coffee and we can talk about why you haven't gone to a symphonic concert? You know, there's a really great story. It's a personal experience. So we were preparing at Bennington with the Bennington group last year. I was preparing this piece, Parables, a piece that was debuted in 2010 or something like that. Really, really new, you know, not fresh new, but new. And after the, you know, dress rehearsal, because everyone was kind of staying there, I went to a local kind of bar that has really great food with all the soloists. And, you know, or actually it was after the first performance and with all the solos. So we sat there and we were just having a good time. And we were there with a bunch of the locals. And we just started, and it was somebody's birthday, and we just chimed in with them. And of course, you know, being professional musicians, they got like the full harmony with the high notes and everything. And they're like, holy shit. And then they broke out, and then we just sort of broke out into singing some more because we were having some fun and having some good wine and some cocktails. And they were like, wait a minute, where are y'all from? And we're like, we just did a show. And they're like, oh, maybe we should come see it. And we were like, okay, we're doing a performance tomorrow. And they bought their tickets on the spot using the phone app. Do you understand what I'm saying?
It's right, of course, yeah. And that's also pretty incredible, you know, right now because the technology can kind of just like influence, potential audience. Like, yeah, you can just buy it right now.
Well, and
come tomorrow. I mean, you're welcome.
Well, it's like, hey, thanks for coming. And it's literally, but it's about having the FaceTime. You know, it's about actually being there, and you know, you don't have to wear like I'm a card carrying opera singer. You know, you don't have to wear it like a badge, but for people to see that, you know, not only to demystify it, not because it shouldn't be mystical. There is something mystical to, you know, playing the music that we've dedicated our lives to, I feel. But I think that there's something really mystical and otherworldly about the other types of music that people, you know, the music of the church, I think is really important too, whether it's, you know, Western classical or whether it's, you know, the music of the Black church, right? That I didn't necessarily grow up in. I had a lot of it in my church, but many of the people I know did, and half of my family did, right? But there's something inimitable about that. And at the same time, people can see themselves in the other because they see themselves in it, right? Can go to a place, they see people who look like them. It's in the vernacular. It's in a language they understand. And so they see themselves and it's a part of their learned experience. And so what we have to do as artists is find a way to break down some of the institutional walls that were created for us. You know, we're inheriting a lot, right? In terms of performance practice and context, right? Social context. And so we have to, it becomes our job to kind of break some of that away, you know, keep it when it serves us, but throw it away when it doesn't, and make what we do part of the learned experience of people. You know, that's why I think, you know, music in schools is great, but, you know, the kids who are going to schools may become the classical music lovers of tomorrow, but we're not still doing anything for their parents. Like their parents might have missed that boat, right? You understand what I'm saying? We focus on the kids because they're in school, but we don't do anything for the parents who aren't there, you know, and we aren't reaching out to the adults who actually have the money and are paying taxes, you know, and voting.
Sure. Well, Cailin, this has been amazing. This has been so fun. Thanks for coming on to this week's episode of my podcast, my humble little podcast called The Everyday Musician, and sharing your thoughts. And what I'll do is what I do with every guest is to let people know in the podcast description where people can find you, which is your website, on Instagram. You're everywhere. So I'll post that information up, but you can go ahead and do some self-promoting right now. Where can people find you?
So if you're interested in looking up what I'm doing, you can find me on my website at CailinMarcelManson.com, all one word. And you can also look up any of the groups that I'm currently working with, whether it's Clark University, which is a wonderful institution, or you can look up the Bennington County Choral Society, the Keene Chorale, or a couple of or Pan Opera, which is a great company in Western Massachusetts. They have a website, and Tundi Productions, which I happen to be on the board of, that does the Wagner in Vermont Festival.
Wonderful. And again, Cailin, thanks so much for coming on. It's good to hear from you. And we'll keep in touch in the near future. Hopefully we can get you back on the podcast.
Oh, yes, I would love it. Thanks so much, Eric. Keep it up.